His Excellency Mr. Ala Issa, Consul General of Egypt in Houston. He has graciously agreed to tell us what he did and why, and possibly what it means for us. He will be available on the phone for about 30 minutes, first with his talk, and then he will take a few questions. The Consul General must leave pretty much on the dot at the half hour, but if you have additional questions afterward, I will stay on to answer them, or they will be answered by my colleague, Carmen Rossi, who is president of a firm called Certify, which handles electronic certificates of origin in 5 different countries, including the United States and Canada. Carmen is an expert on both manual and electronic processing of certificates of origin. We will also explore the certificates of origin topic further at a session at the ACCE convention in Los Angeles this summer. That will be on August 6th. And now for the man of the hour, or shall I say the man of the half hour. I am pleased to ask His Excellency Mr. Ala Issa to say a few words to the Chamber community of the United States and Canada. Consul General Issa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you, if not personally, but at least over the conference call. Let me begin by getting straight into the subject. As of course you've been previously notified by Chris Mead and the ACCE of basically the situation we encountered and what the problems are, the implications for a country, an importing country such as Egypt or any other state in the world, and what steps we are taking to attempt to rectify this situation with regards to us. Now, the Consulate of Egypt in Houston, which is one of 4 consulates for Egypt in the U.S., the others being in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York City. The consulate here in Houston processes approximately 200 commercial documents every day. They are the main source of income in terms of revenue generated by the consulates, given that there is not a significant Egyptian population here in the Houston area or the 11 states that we cover. So really the primary purpose for the Consulate of Houston is to address and process commercial documents, and a secondary, although very important part, is to serve Egyptian citizens, the limited number of them who are reside within the 11 states that we cover, and also American citizens who wish to travel to Egypt. But as I mentioned, I think it would be a fair assumption to say that about 75 to 80% of the work we do is related to commercial documents rather than visas or citizen services. Now, periodically we do a spot check on some of these commercial documents. I arrived here in September. I started that spot check in January over a course of a couple of weeks, where we were looking at the certificates of origin and the commercial invoices which we received from the freight forwarding companies to authenticate and authorize here at the consulate on behalf of the companies involved. What we found in our spot check, which lasted for about approximately 5 weeks, I should say, were quite a number of discrepancies. Primarily, those discrepancies were seals of chambers of commerce which did not exist, basically fictitious chambers of commerce. In other cases, there were legitimate chambers of commerce, but whose papers were sealed and signed by individuals who were not authorized by that chamber of commerce to sign the papers. In 2 instances, they were signed by individuals who had left the chamber of commerce over 5 years ago and were no longer affiliated with this in any way, although they still had the seal with them, given that the chamber policy was to lend out the seal to its members, and they were not very strict about getting it back after those members discharged from the chamber of commerce. And the same case occurs with some commercial invoices as well. And in the case of 3 cases of notary publics whose commission has expired but who still continue to provide notarial services for a fee, even though their commission has expired, and we verified that by referring to the Secretary of State of the relevant states. Now, the implications from our perspective, a country like Egypt, are quite significant. Approximately 4 years ago, there was a case in Egypt, a criminal case, where a significant quantity of imported beef imported from the U.S. entered Egypt and was found to be unfit for human consumption because it had been kept in cold storage for over 1.5 years beyond its expiration date. And it was basically rescinded by the authorities from the market and destroyed. A heavy fine and a prison sentence were levied on the individuals responsible. But what was found was that that shipment, which was originated from the U.S., did not actually originate from the U.S., but actually came from Brazil, was on a refrigerated vessel. It was transshipped to another vessel at a U.S. port. A certificate of origin was issued for that beef, that it was originating from the U.S., and thus making its entry into Egypt easier and making it more difficult for Egyptian authorities to detect the discrepancies and the irregularities which were in that consignment. Another issue which is of importance also, for instance, relates to a similar also cases of transshipment, particularly powdered skimmed milk, which is used extensively in the food industry in many countries, of course, and Egypt included. Much of it is imported from the U.S. into Egypt, but there was a case of a transshipment of powdered skimmed milk from China, which had also been transshipped via a U.S. port, and a certificate of origin was issued and was sealed by Chamber of Commerce, stating that its origin was the U.S. And upon entry into the port of Egypt, the health inspections found very high levels of melamine, which is a chemical detrimental to human health, in that shipment, and it was destroyed. Now, this explains the importance of certificates of origin, not simply from the exporters or the exporting states or the exporting companies' perspective, but much more importantly from the importing countries' point of view. Now, what the role of the consulates is critical, because in many ways the consulates are the first line of defense against such fraudulent activities, whether they refer to manufactured goods or spare parts for automobiles which may not be original parts and simply being transshipped. But even more, the risks become even more evident when the issues relate to commodities that are destined for human consumption and food, such as foodstuffs. This is why the consulate has, the Egyptian consulate in Houston and many other consulates have become much more strict in the guidelines they insist on before they accept to authenticate any commercial documents. Now, what those guidelines are, I'll tell you. In Houston, after we discovered these discrepancies and irregularities over the course of 5 weeks, we immediately ceased dealing with a number of chambers of commerce, either because they were fraudulent or because their practices were far too permissive in granting their seals and right to signature to a significant number of their members. Some of them, without mentioning names, are very old established chambers of commerce here in Houston, in the Houston area or in Texas, have been in business for over 80 or 100 years, but their policy regarding lending out their seal is very permissive. Some of them have lent out their seal to over 120 members, and there is simply absolutely, they don't even have a record of them, nor do we have a record of them, nor do we have a record of their signature. And in addition, joining the chambers of commerce, such as the ones I mentioned, is very easy. So what many of the freight forwarding companies do is they simply go pay the fee, join that Chamber of Commerce, and pay the fee to have the right to use the seal and signature, and simply rubber stamp all the documents they need and submit them to the consulate for authorization and authentication. So what we did immediately was stop dealing with a number of these chambers of commerce. And then the second step was the 11 states in the southern U.S. that we cover, we wrote to the Office of the Governor, to the Economic Development Office, and the officers asking them to identify for us the 4 biggest chambers of commerce in terms of membership and in terms of turnover and within that state. And if any official chamber of commerce exists, that also we requested to be notified of. We then started contacting individually each of these chambers of commerce, the dominant ones, asking them some very specific questions regarding their membership, criteria for membership, criteria for authenticating documents and lending out their seals, their guidelines for who is authorized to sign on the chamber's behalf or not. And another guideline which we thought might be useful but not conclusive for us is whether such a chamber is a member either of the ACCE or the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And based on the feedback that we got, we've started identifying only 2 chambers of commerce in each state with whom we will deal and accept any documents coming, having been issued, sealed, or authenticated by those 2 chambers of commerce. I discussed this issue with Mr. Mead before and initially and indicated that we are not restricting it only to 2 chambers of commerce per state, although we are doing so at this stage, but we are open to including and dealing with more chambers of commerce as time goes by, providing that we can be assured that they have a rigorous and strict policy with regards to their seals and their signatures. If I can give an example, for instance, in Colorado, even though we've identified 2 major chambers of commerce, one chamber of commerce, which is not of those 2, is in a town called Greeley, Colorado, which is not a very big town. It is a town that caters primarily to the meatpacking industry, and given the fact that Egypt imports a lot of beef from the U.S., of course, we've included the Greeley Chamber of Commerce among the chambers that we will deal with in Colorado after they have assured us of their policies and guidelines regarding seals and signatures. At this stage, this policy is implemented by the consulate in Houston, which is the consulate I had, but we have notified headquarters, and the headquarters in Egypt is in touch with the other consulates in the U.S. in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles, with the objective of having a common standard such as the one we've applied become applicable for all Egyptian consulates in the U.S., Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, and Houston as well. Also, we've just begun looking into the E-Verify system to see whether that will fit the checks that we require. And once we are assured of that, and we do have approval to work with the E-Verify system, have the approval of the customs authorities, the port authorities in Egypt that they can accept them, then that is another forum we will look to towards verifying certificates of origin and invoices. I hope I've explained our policy at this stage. I would very much, I think, like to open it up for questions now, and I think that will raise some more issues which people may be more interested in. Thank you, Chris.
Oh, Consul General Issa, thank you very much for that. That was very interesting. And I think you were referring to the E-Certify system.
Yes,
yeah. Right, E-Certify system. One question, you mentioned that the rest, and I'll open up the others in just a second. You mentioned that the other Egyptian consulates may or likely will be pursuing the similar programs in their parts of the country. What about other countries? Do they know about this? Is this something that other countries may start doing? What's your impression?
I expect it's something, because when we notified headquarters in detail of all of the issues that we've faced and the policies we're implementing here in Houston, and this was circulated to the Egyptian consulates all over the world as well. I think this is an issue I would expect that will be looked into specifically at the consulates which do a significant number of commercial documents, deal with a significant number of commercial documents. Some of our consulates in other countries deal primarily with issuing visas to tourists and any Egyptian citizens there, with very little work on commercial documents. I think the focus will be on the consulates, the major consulates in countries with whom Egypt has significant commercial interaction. And I think once that is established, it will simply be a question of time before the entire system is unified across the entire spectrum of Egyptian consulates all over the world.
But what about, for example, other countries with consulates in the United States, or other countries that deal with U.S. certificates of origin? Are they going to follow Egypt's lead and look at the way American certificates of origin are handled, or do you think it's going to?
Actually, it's quite interesting you say that. I cannot speak for them, but we are in a few weeks' time having a meeting of the consuls general here in Houston. It's an unofficial meeting. Some of us get together, 25 of us get together over lunch to discuss key issues that we face in our work and interaction. And this is one of the issues that I have on the agenda for that lunch to raise with all of the other consulates. I've discussed it with a few consulates simply on a bilateral basis individually. Like I do know that the UK, Britain, the consulates of the Netherlands and the French consulates follow a very strict policy like the one we've started implementing, and they've been doing that even before we began. But I expect others, once I raise it, and this will come up for discussion, especially the problems that I've identified, that, I think one will see possibly a tendency to move towards that direction, especially given the fact that, for instance, in Houston, you do have a major chamber of commerce, which is a Greater Houston Partnership, which has very strict guidelines for signature and seals. They charge an insignificant amount of money, some $20 for non-members and $10 for members, and it's easily accessible to everyone. So I think that would be an attractive option. I mean, I can tell you that we have gone to the Greater Houston Partnership now and have started working with them on an almost exclusive basis. But,
That's very helpful. I appreciate it. Thank you, Consul General Issa. Now, let's see. Okay, I'm sorry. I guess I need to read the questions. Here it is. Here's a question from the audience. Please provide the most current policy and process for authentication necessary for compliance. Who should sign, etc.? Well, that's a lot to ask of you, Consul General.
No, not at all. The current policy is that documents, all commercial documents, invoices or certificates of origin, need to be notarized. And first of all, notarized. I have to have three things for any commercial document. One is the notary public. The second is the letter from the Secretary of State telling me that that notary public is a bona fide notary public and that his commission is still valid. And the third is the stamp, seal, and signature of the Chamber of Commerce, which is among one of the chambers of commerce that we've identified and started working with. So these are the three things that I look for. The only exception are documents which are issued by federal agencies or departments of the United States. If I have a certificate of origin issued by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which bears the watermark of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, then I do not need the Chamber of Commerce seal on that or the notary public. Otherwise, unless it's a federal agency with a clear watermark on the documents, then I require all three: the notary public, the letter of the Secretary of State, as well as the seal and signature of one of the chambers of commerce that we have started dealing with.
I see. Okay. Thank you. I think we may talk afterwards about the notary issue. That may have changed, but we will check on that one. I know that the stamp and seal is a very big deal, very big issue in this country. Mm-hmm. Here's another question. What about the Cal Chamber for California and chambers who are members of this chamber adhering to policies? So chambers that are members of state chambers, I guess, not just the California chamber, but so you're looking at chambers that are, yeah, go ahead.
No, as I said, the initial step, given the significant amount of irregularities that we uncovered, was to restrict ourselves to dealing with 2 chambers of commerce in each state. And the reason for that is we chose the 2 biggest chambers of commerce, either in terms of membership, but equally the criteria was how rigorous their policies were regarding seal and signature. We chose only 2 from each state because approximately from every chamber you have three authorized signatures. So that gives you 6 signatures to check for each state. For 11 states, it means that every document we get, we have 66 signatures to check. But California, I don't deal with because we have a consulate in Los Angeles. So I think they will have to follow the guidelines from that consulate until we have a unified system for the Egyptian consulates, although I'm expecting that there is a movement towards that direction, within the near future. But if I were to get a document from Los Angeles, I would not reject it outright, but what I would do is I would contact the Chamber of Commerce which has sealed it. I would send them the document to verify that that seal is correct and the signature is authorized. And I would also inquire from them as to what their policy is regarding lending out their seals.
Oh, thank you. Here's another question. Is there a list of other states and chambers that the consulates will accept certificates of origins from? I guess that means which ones have you selected? Is there a list of those yet?
Yes, I have a number of them, before me. Like in Louisiana, we're working with the Baton Rouge Chamber of Commerce. Here, we're working with the Greater Houston Partnership. I can certainly make that list available to your members. We can sort of type it out, and it's still an internal list. We've notified the freight forwarding companies that we deal with that list. I can certainly provide you with that list, and you can email it out to your colleagues.
I appreciate it. Okay, here's another question. What about delivery agents? I guess that delivery agents who supposedly do the certificates of origin.
Yes, sir. As far as the Consulate of Egypt here in Houston is concerned, there are about 4 delivery agents or five delivery agents, 5 companies that provide about 80% of the commercial documents that we receive here in Houston. We summoned the heads of all of those companies in. When we discovered these irregularities, we returned all of the documents to them. We informed them that we are going to be moving towards much stricter guidelines, and we would notify them about it. 5 weeks later, when we did settle on the Chamber of Commerce that we deal with, we summoned them in again for a meeting. We notified them of the Chambers of Commerce that we will be dealing with exclusively as far as they're concerned, and the policies we're looking into, and that all documents must meet those criteria, otherwise we will reject them outright. And they've been fairly compliant because they have no other avenue to go to.
So this means that the big shipping company, the really big shipping companies, will now be sure to get a stamp from a Chamber of Commerce.
I hope so.
Is that correct?
I mean, if they don't, then the documents will be returned. Yeah.
I see. Here's another question. Let's see. How will Chambers of Commerce be notified whether or not they are approved? We are one of.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the ones that we have started dealing with, we have notified them that we are going to accept their seals and signatures. So they've been notified. The ones we have ceased working with, we have also notified them. We have written letters out to them telling them that unfortunately we will no longer be able to process documents coming from the Chamber of Commerce because of the fact of their policies regarding lending out their seals and signatures are not sufficiently rigorous to assure us of a thorough process, that we can rely upon before we authenticate the documents on our part.
I see. Thank you. This here's another question. But what exactly is the Chamber saying by stamping and signing the certificates?
Well, what the Chamber is saying is that to the best of its knowledge, and in all good faith, it has done all that is within its power to verify that that certificate of origin is a correct one, and equally that that invoice is a correct one. And I know that some of the big chambers of commerce, of course, what they do is they do, as we did, they do spot checks for some of these documents that they receive from all over. Every so often they send out a document to the Chamber of Commerce asking them to verify whether this is correct or not. Every so often they reach out and send a fax or email a copy of an invoice that they received to the company that supposedly issued it, asking them to verify that the date and number of that invoice is in fact corresponding with what's in the records. And that's what one expects from Chambers of Commerce. There is no absolute level of assurity that one can reach, but what they are doing is that they're saying that to the best of their ability and given their rigorous and serious guidelines and policies in dealing with commercial documents, they are verifying for us that these documents are bona fide and that they were, the certificates of origin are indeed, the goods are coming out of the U.S. and that these invoices are indeed legitimate invoices issued by the companies on whose letterhead it appears.
Thank you. Consul General, do you have time for one more question?
Yes, of course, by all means.
Okay, here we go. Do you require a raised notary seal, or will you accept an electronic version?
We have never yet dealt with an electronic version of a notary seal. Our system is not equipped to deal with the electronic seals. This is one of the reasons why it's taking us some time to see how we can deal with the e-verify, e-certify process. Not because it is insufficiently rigorous. In fact, it is quite rigorous with a lot of checks and balances built into it. But it's a question of whether our system can deal with it or not, and that's what we're working on.
I see. Very helpful.
But to get back to even for the notary publics, I mean the raised seal which is on the paper, when that seal in some cases comes to me insufficiently clear, it's very blurred, we return the documents, we no longer accept them. And they have to make sure that the seals are very clear, they are legible to us at the consulate. Even though the Secretary of State's letter may be there, we have to be able to see the seal and verify it with the ones we have.
Consul General, this has been very, very interesting and very helpful to our group. Do you have any final words to say?
Simply to thank you and to stress, and I really have to say I cannot stress enough, the importance that Chambers of Commerce do follow rigorous guidelines with regarding to their seals and signatures. As I've explained, the problems we've encountered, and the policy changes that we've had to adopt, including ceasing to deal with a significant number of chambers of commerce simply because their policies were not sufficiently rigorous to assure us that they were, in fact, doing what is necessary to provide us with the assurance that the goods are of U.S. origin or that the invoices are authentic invoices. And it's a pity, it's a shame. We used to deal with many more chambers of commerce than we do now. But in the interest of our country, and I think in the interest of yours, in the interest of public health, especially that we live in a world where global trade is so fluid and so moves at such a fast pace, that it's difficult to really for goods to remain in port for a few weeks while you spot check every specific document with the company and assure yourself of the authenticity of the origin of the goods. The role of chambers of commerce becomes critical, and as a result of that, we can only rely on chambers of commerce that really do, to the extent possible, fulfill a very rigorous policy of checking against these documents and assuring us of their authenticity. And I hope that is something that people will take home to their chambers. That as I mentioned, a very established chamber of commerce here in Texas. It's over 100 years since it was established. There is no doubt that it's a bona fide chamber of commerce, but we simply had to stop dealing with it because they have over 120 members who have their seal and have the authority to sign on their behalf, and we simply cannot deal with that anymore.
Consul General, this is a very important message to our members. We will also inform our other members about this, and I can't thank you enough for letting us know what happened, why it happened, and for our chambers out there, we'll have a little bit more time to talk for questions with Carmen and me, but I think one of the messages we've heard pretty clearly is hang on to your seal. So, Consul General, thank you so much, and we hope to see you in person sometime.
Thank you, Mr. Mead. It's my pleasure. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone. I hope you have a good day.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye. The rest of you, please, if you have any further questions, the real authority, I'm afraid, has just left, but we have someone of equal authority on certificates of origin in general and on policies around the world, including here in the United States. That's Carmen Rossi, the president of East Certify. And Carmen, you're still on the line, right?
Yes, I'm still here, Chris.
Terrific. Carmen's from Australia, but we understand him pretty well. And so I'm going to I guess we'll continue just asking questions, and I'm going to read them off, the ones that you type in. Here's the first question. How is it possible for a chamber executive at one of the approved chambers to possess the knowledge necessary to approve a certificate for a company located, can you scroll, in another community of his or her state? Carmen, do you want to try that one? In other words, let's say there's a state 300 miles long and you've got a chamber at one end of the state that's certifying a company on the other end.
Sure.
How can the chamber do that?
Okay, so Chris, what the Consul General was alluding to in terms of choosing chambers that had membership, one of the ways is that if they are a long-standing member, they already have a relationship, and so those chambers that have members and even non-members where they provide services, they would be aware of who they are. If they are further away, then there is, under the International Certificate of Origin guidelines published by the International Chambers of Commerce, provisions for a chamber to thoroughly authenticate that particular exporter or freight forwarder. So it really is up to the chamber to identify, in terms of policy and procedure, what that authentication process is. And that authentication includes signing of an indemnity, identifying who is authorized within that company, for that company to provide signatures, all of which can be done manually, as is the current procedure. And of course, these days there's also the option of electronic. And you heard that the Consul General is looking at how that could be incorporated into their systems as opposed to an external system that can do it right now.
Great. Can you? The next question.
Juan Chavera raised his hand. He should be able to talk now.
Oh, Juan Chavera, can you speak? I think you may be able to talk right into this.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, I was actually wondering, how would you know, the consulate was talking about authorized signatures for your chamber. How would you know or going about finding out who was currently on your list of authorized signatures to sign off on the certificates of origin?
Within the chamber?
Yes, was that within the chamber, or is it just within the organizations that we're signing them for?
Sorry. So if the question is what signatures are required, well, the chamber itself must have an authorized officer, and that authorized officer manages the authorized signatories on behalf of the chamber. And again, what the Consul General was alluding to was that each person that is authorized, that is checking the documentation, applies their signature. And what that means is that if one person is authorized and the other person signs that person's name, that's not acceptable. So the actual person who is checking the documents and signing, that's their signature that is expected. On the part of the exporter, through that process of authentication and indemnification, the authorized officer of the export company, let's say, again is managing the signatories of the export company, which are retained by the chamber. So the chamber should have in their possession indemnification letters from the export company and a list of signatories that is authorized by that company that the chamber will receive, for example, on the commercial invoice and or the certificate, against which they'll apply their seal or stamp and their signature. That's the actual procedure.
So we need to have the indemnification letter as well as a list of signatures from each company that exports through, that comes with a form to us.
Correct. Yeah, the current manual procedure requires those two documents in place.
And another question, I know Chris had mentioned something about it earlier. Does the person who is signing off for the chamber, do they need to be notarized and notarize that? Or is that a new policy that's no longer out?
Okay, so the Consul General spoke about notarization, and I would like to have a discussion with the Consul General about that, because quite some time ago, the International Chambers of Commerce had in fact published a change to the international rules in that the requirement for a notary signing the documents was removed because the exporter or the freight forwarder was taking full responsibility for the declarations and signatures being applied to the documents prior to being presented to the chamber. So in actual fact, under the new rules, a notary is no longer required. However, it is interesting that the consul made mention of it for Egypt, and he also made mention that they are reviewing their policies, and I'd like to suggest that in all probability they will, in reviewing those policies and standardizing, will most probably adopt the formal undertaking that now forms part of the international rules and guidelines for certificates of origin.
Incidentally, there may be some of you on this call who find a lot of this terminology and so on confusing. It's been, I think we all have kind of come to realize in this, I guess you could call it sort of a crisis, that there hasn't been much training from ACCE or from anyone else on how to do certificates of origin properly. I'm told from Carmen that it takes about 2 days to train someone really well in it, and we're probably going to have some sort of training like that in the fall. But we can't tell you yet which city or even which provider yet, but the chances are we're going to have something like that available in the fall. But if your chamber does 20 certificates a year or even 120, it may be something you don't want to do, and that's okay. You can give it. You can let other chambers do it. You can say, well, you see the chamber over there or the chamber across the state that with an electronic process, let them do it. You don't have to do this, but if you do it, you should do it right. I guess that's the main thing. If you're going to do it right. And the first rule in that, which ACC is coming out pretty strong on, is I think you've heard, is hang on to your seal. And had chambers been hanging on to their seals, we wouldn't have this problem right now with the Consulate General of Houston. Next question.
Michael.
Oh, Michael, I think you can talk. Michael Ravanelli?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make, okay. First of all, what you just said about the upcoming training is awesome, because my question and or statement is around that. I've been here 6 years. I'm an executive of our chamber. I'm just flabbergasted that I cannot find any information on what is the proper way to complete these. And we just talked about rigorous and strict policies and guidelines. I can't find a sample of those. I have reached out in the past couple of years to the state chamber, the U.S. chamber, and to ACE, and just can't seem to find the right answers. And we do want to do these, even though we only do about 100 a year, because we want to provide that service to our members. Is there any place I can at least start looking for some of these answers?
Well, the book that gives the international guidelines is available for sale. We have mentioned it to our members. I think only about 20 copies have been bought, though. Carmen, can you tell them a little bit more about that?
Sure. The publication that Chris is referring to is available on the ICC website. However, if you are for U.S. Chambers of Commerce, you will be redirected to the United States Council of International Business, and they have an ICC Books page on their website from which you can purchase the International Certificate of Origin Guidelines. And that publication is the official, it is the only publication of its kind. There have been some people that have written articles. We actually wrote a condensed version of that into what every CEO needs to know about certificates of origin. And so most definitely a chamber that is processing any certificates of origin should have a copy. And where chambers have implemented policies and procedures, they have invariably used that publication as their guideline for those internal policies and procedures.
Paul Monroe, do you have a question for us? I'm sorry, Paul Laskowski. Is he on? Paul, are you still there? I guess he's moved on. Bob Bartz, do you have a question for us? Sorry, we'll try one or two more here. Is that it?
That's all the hands that were up.
Okay, we seem to have covered all the questions. Okay, let's take two more typed-in questions, and then we will close this. We will write an article about this and post it on our website, and there will be a session at our convention next summer, and we will have some kind of training this fall. So two more questions. Here's one. what chamber are they using in Georgia? I don't know, but he's going to send us the list that he has selected, and we will get that out to you.
Chris, while you're reading out the next one, could I just mention that the Consul General also mentioned that they certify the documents at the consulate as well. So for those chambers that might not be aware, or Egypt, it's a two-step process. One is the chamber stamps and signs in the first instance, and then those documents are sent to the consulate for stamping and verifying again. So in that case, it's a two-step process, but not all countries do that. So where it's a standard certificate where a consulate is not involved, then the same rules apply as is in the guideline.
Thanks, Carmen. Okay, here's our last question, and funny enough, it mentions e-Certify. Here we go. How do we know if e-Certify is accepted by all countries, and who would we send to get this and know it was going to be accepted in that country?
Okay, so we don't have a comprehensive list of all the countries that are accepting certificates of origin that are stamped electronically. In the International Certificate of Origin guidelines, it does talk about certificates being processed electronically being acceptable. But as the Consul General explained, in most cases where countries are not sure about the acceptance of them, it's more to do with their internal systems and processes. And so we know from all of the chambers that are processing electronically and all the countries that they're going to that the first attempt to present a document that looks different from the ones that were processed manually raises a question. And we have found that by communicating and educating and advising and pre-communicating the change that's occurring in terms of processing electronically, after about 2 or 3 attempts, we're finding that those countries that originally said no are in fact accepting them. And so unfortunately, because there are many countries around the world, and even ICC themselves are not up to date with how many countries require which certificates. There's also the shift towards preferential certificates of origin. So it's a moving target in terms of identifying it. Our rule of thumb is that if we try it electronically, if it doesn't work after about 3 times, then there needs to be a discussion at the highest level, and that's when we get the International Chamber of Commerce involved, talking with the chambers in that country and talking with the customs officials in relation to the acceptance. So it's a bit of a process, but we've had many successes in that process, and we are very willing to work with the chamber, the customs officials, the International Chamber of Commerce, and with all of us working together, I think that's a very solid consolidated approach, and it is working for us, and ultimately I think it'll be electronic 100%.
Incidentally, the e-Certify operates, does by far the largest percentage it does all the electronic certificates for Australia and New Zealand, and by far, what is it? It's more than 80% of the certificates there are electronic now, right?
Very high percentage, Chris. Absolutely.
So it's going, and it has been a steady increase. It's starting to increase here in the United States. I think that's just the wave of the future. We can talk about these things in the future. You see contact information for both Carmen and me. If it's a hard question, send it to Carmen. I'll take the easy ones. And we would like to keep pushing on this. And I guess the Egyptians have given us one big push. I did not realize all that they are doing. It's pretty astounding, and I'm not sure what this is going to mean to the whole industry here in the United States. Carmen, do you have any thoughts on what's your reaction to what he said?
As you know, Chris, we had discussed the implications of this. What what impressed me is the thoroughness of their processes in terms of doing their spot check. And, you know, when they're talking about the implications to the import country, and there is a criminal offence for the importer in terms of breaches of origin and process, I think that tells you how seriously he and Egypt is looking at this. And in fact, I'm sure that as a result of what he has said, other countries will be stepping up and making their requirements known to the export community here in the US as well. So I think it would be a sad day if any chamber ignored what the Consul General is saying, in that they might get the impression that you could get away with it with other countries who are not doing those spot checks. So I think this is a valuable opportunity for chambers to review their processes, because the last thing you would want is for an exporter, a US exporter, to be involved, or even freight forwarders for that matter, to be involved in a situation where an importer and all of their employees end up in jail. That's not a pretty place to be.
Absolutely. On that exciting note, yeah, thank you. That's very helpful, and I appreciate. I think this, in some ways, this is a bit of a historic phone call for this. What some might consider a backwater of the chamber industry, but is actually not so in other countries. And I think we may see it come back and be an important part here, a part where maybe, and here's another thought, chambers actually charge for the service. Wouldn't that be a crazy thought? And I know some chambers do, but I think all chambers should, because this, to be done right, you got to do it right, and that means give it attention, the kind of attention that you should be paid for. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. I just want to thank you all for coming on board for this call. You can say you were here. I think our certificate of origin world has changed forever. That's my gut feeling. We'll find out in the next few months, I'm sure. Thanks again. And Carmen, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you for everyone attending.